hello.
Hello to you.
How are things?
Good. Fine. Um, fine. Continuing to make it through our strange world right now. Um, yeah, just woke up. It's a little after 7:30 in the morning here.
Hooray, West Coast!
Yes, broadcasting from the West Coast as opposed to where you're well into your day. So
This
if
is
I'm,
true, although I woke up at the same time, my time. I don't know if that makes sense.
oh, yeah, no. So well, fair enough. Yeah, I don't know what a normal time to get up is anymore right now. It seems like I used to get up earlier than this on a regular basis back when the world was functioning correctly, but this feels early under the current circumstances.
Yeah, I went through this period in the winter where I was up at like 4 and 4:30 every day. I went to the gym. I have no idea what was causing it. It just happened.
Well, good
And
for
then
you.
as soon as COVID hit, I was like back to the back to what I
Yeah.
assume is relatively
Yeah.
normal. I don't know.
Well, yeah. All that ambition evaporates in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
a crisis, maybe. Except for some people. I have a neighbor who is who gets up and runs, sort of sprints up and down the street. It's always very, I don't know, embarrassing to exist in the presence of that in some ways. It's like, oh, I'm not doing that. So anyway, I'm up, I'm here, ready to go.
Very exciting. Yeah, I have a full day planned. I don't know about you. This is the first of three streams Sweet Tea Shakespeare is doing today. We have at 1 o'clock Eastern. We're doing our Enneagram and Shakespeare series, and we're doing Enneagram 8, and I might be an 8, so we'll see how that goes. And then our assistant artistic director Claire has an interview this afternoon. And then I'm in rehearsal. Well, sort of in filming actually for our current project, which is Two Noble Kinsmen.
So you decided to shoot that. Is that where you landed with
We're
it?
shooting it. Yes, it has been shot, and we are shooting it again.
Oh,
Well, partly shot. We started last night. We're doing okay at the social distancing thing. We have some. It's not. It's. I mean, like, this. We're trying to figure things out, but we're doing okay at it. We have some family members, and that helps. Family members in the cast, I should say. And
mm-hmm.
So.
Are you going to be editing those together?
Yeah, I have a former student who is runs a film company in town. He's actually moving to LA in a couple weeks,
That's cool.
and yeah, he's been filming his little 3 camera setup. He'll lay all those together, and then we will have something to see.
That's exciting.
Like into July sometime, I'm guessing.
Where are you planning on putting that up when it's all done?
We'll put it up like it'll be behind a paywall somehow. I got to figure out how to do that. I know a lot of places are using like Vimeo behind
Mm-hmm.
a paywall, so we'll do that. Make people pay a couple bucks, see it.
Yeah, that's exciting. We'll
Yeah,
have to let
we're trying
everybody
to figure
know.
out the whole streaming thing because it may be the next 2 years of our lives.
Ugh.
And if we don't figure it out now, it will just be punting. So
Yeah. What? How are things in your state as far as the whole thing goes? I know that right now, uh, particularly a lot of states that opened up more are having big spikes happen right now.
yeah,
Is that?
we're in a real interesting spot. We're still climbing
Mm-hmm.
in total cases and in tests, and there's sort of a correlation between those two, but that is makes it understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Like positive or tests are driving up positive things, but as a um, so that's the kind of good news actually, because the bad news is that that hospitalizations are still sort of going up. Hospital stays are going down, so the length of stay is going down. I don't know if that could be good or bad. Either you're there a short time and you die, or you're there a short time and you're better. Um, so, but we're on the overall. We have not crested. We are still on the uptake, and
Yeah.
the conventional thinking was that we would, if everything was going well, we would be entering what we call phase three, end of this week or end of next week, and it does not look like that will happen.
Yeah.
Although what's
It,
really interesting, we have a moderate Democratic governor who I think might like to take a stronger hand, but the political forces in North Carolina are such that I don't think that's allowed.
well, it's funny because there is a point at which I think you cross the line and it's no longer up for debate. It's been fascinating to watch states like Texas and Florida who've been up until this point really like openly hostile towards more being like more restrictive in the last couple of days grapple with some pretty serious spikes here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know we talked about this here on the show, like the idea that maybe it'll work out, right? That this will happen and people reopen and then suddenly maybe it won't be as bad, and it turns out no, it's going to be bad, and all those predictions are true, and they actually are being acknowledged and are upsetting to the people in those states. It's like, well, this is, yes, it's a real thing. And it's interesting to watch people who are disinclined to believe that have to grapple with the reality of it. Um, obviously, the president sort of ended up in that situation really, directly this week. Watching that happen has been absolutely fascinating.
I sort of watched the Tulsa thing from the perspective of a relatively professional theater maker, I guess, and
Oh, it's interesting.
and
Is your
he did he broke the cardinal rule. I think he does this all the time. I'm like all cardinal rules, all rules are broken. I think,
sure right?
but
Yeah.
I as a person whose brand is partly entertainer, um,
Hmm.
and who does have some mastery over it, I I I wonder about the setting of unreasonable expectations. That's how I read that.
Yeah.
That the expectations were so outrageous, and then of course he didn't meet them. And even I don't think he would have met the expectations had he lowered them significantly, just because of the way that thing played out. But it was a perfect example of the theater of it was setting high expectations and then not delivering, and that being the main source of the criticism rather than uh, and that was almost the bigger story over the fact that we're gathering sort of some small few thousand people into an arena to
Yeah.
each other, you know.
Well, yes. It struck me that it's another example of this continuing trend in the Trump era that I find eye opening and kind of mystifying at the same time. It's that he, in particular, but also those in his sort of circle, really seem to believe the stuff that I always assumed was just knowing sort of propaganda that was understood not to be believed by the people saying it. That makes any sense? Like, the thing that's interesting about Trump. Well, let me explain what I mean. I feel like in politics, especially on the right, but it happens on the left to a certain degree as well. You have these voices that are there for the specific purpose of riling up and entertaining your base, right? With this sort of constant flow of agitating information. Talk radio historically and uh, Fox News to a large extent, especially in their entertainment programming on Fox News, uh, and places like that where they're trying to make money primarily, by you know running their con basically, but also they serve some functional political purpose in keeping your base agitated. But I always assumed that it was understood by the people engaged in that operation, and particularly by the people who sort of structurally benefited from it and also ran it, that they knew it wasn't true, like, or that it was an exaggeration or a distortion, or that you know the truth was something different. I always assumed there was something more cynical and pragmatic at play with that sort of thing, and I think that at certain times that has been more true. You remember back during the George W. Bush era, Karl Rove used to, you could track down interviews of him talking about that specifically. It's like we distort reality, and we talk about, I, he like gave whole interviews where he said, like, the whole purpose of what we do is argue in bad faith in the, in order to achieve certain ends. It's real sort of ugly political stuff, but guys like that understand, Rush Limbaugh's a liar, right? Or at least not telling the truth in an open way, or Sean Hannity's a liar, or all these people are, not representing reality. And then like the crazy, crazy stuff like you find on World Net Daily, or, Alex Jones or whatever, that's, of dubious use to your project in the first place, but certainly not true. And what's interesting with Donald Trump is that he's a true believer. He's one of the rubes. You know what I mean? It's like he's one of the marks who, just actually believed that stuff. Which is, if I'm a Republican, that would be very embarrassing to me. Like, especially if I'm a Republican on the administrative end of things or the media end of things, and I know for a fact that this operation is, not actually accurate or true, and that it's this sort of chum that you throw up for dum-dums to eat, and then to find out that the president is actually one of them. It's embarrassing, right? And it probably puts those people, especially at an operation like Fox, in a weird position, because they can't say as they would behind closed doors to somebody who is more savvy. Well, obviously we know that Sean Hannity's full of crap, but he's useful. You know what I mean? It's like that's something that like Lachlan Murdoch can't actually say to the president when he meets with him, because the president's like, a fan in a way that, I mean, I assume that those media people like Lachlan Murdoch, for instance, really is pretty contemptuous of his audience and doesn't like him very much. And then you find out that the president's actually one of those, jackasses who believes all the dumbest fever swamp stuff that you're throwing up there to put a buck in your pocket, and also to sort of gin up enthusiasm for your cause. That must be disconcerting. All of which comes to like this thing with Tulsa, and it's like I mean, the president's been talking out of both sides of his mouth when it comes to the virus for a while now, right? Has been saying it's not true, and like implicitly don't wear masks because I don't wear masks, and the whole thing's exaggerated, and blah 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 blah. While also sort of nominally passing on the information that he's getting from the people who actually know things. It's like, oh, the virus is also serious and we should be careful, but at the same time, it's not serious. Don't wear masks and take this drug that doesn't do anything for it, because maybe it will. And I guess I just sort of assumed, well, he I don't know. I don't know where I land on that. If he knows that it's actually a thing, but is downplaying it, and for political purposes, and because he doesn't care if people die, and just needs the economy to pick up. I suspect that that might be true. But then it was interesting that he just really refuses to believe things that would be politically advantageous for him to understand. Do you know what I mean? It's like people aren't going to show up to your giant stadium thing because they're afraid. You know what I mean? And it's like this sign of like hubris, which unsurprisingly is what undergirds a lot of his choices. But to assume, well, just because I said, I've been telling people it's not real, and I know that there are a lot of people who don't think it's real, so surely we'll have 1 million people show up at this thing. And it turns out, people are smarter than that, right? Most people are actually smarter than that and don't believe, take at face value the, dumb conspiracy stuff that apparently the president believes, wholeheartedly.
Well,
And
and
so he stepped in it.
yeah, to me, part of this is you may give more credit to the population than I do, um, because I do think it's a question of, for me, it's a question of scale. I say this as a person who went uh, really out for the first time this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a significant public setting. I went to a local um, brewery, and they have a big outdoor space, and so
Yeah.
it made sense to go there. And there were, I don't know, a couple hundred people sitting on top of each other. Not a single one besides me and my family were wearing masks at all, and and I thought, oh, this is icky. And at the same time, I thought, um, it's a sense of scale, right? I mean, those people will show up outdoors to something that's the perception is low risk, and they will not show for two or 300 people maybe, but they will not show up to an indoor space,
Yeah. Well,
with
there
a
it,
few
it just
thousand people involved.
yeah, it shows there are limits to how far people are willing to sort of push it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I understand the sort of impulse to sort of throw caution to the wind to a certain extent because you feel cooped up and bored and irritated, and how long can they possibly expect us to do this, blah blah blah. But at some point, if you're a normal person, some degree of self-preservation and uh, you know, just caution kicks in, right? And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I might be willing to go sit at a restaurant and uh, you know, take that risk, but there's no way that I'm going to stand shoulder to shoulder with thousands of people who were shouting and spraying particulate into the. I mean, here's the thing: 6,000 people. Obviously, it's like a fraction of what that place could hold, but those people were all like packed up against each other, all sort of virtue signaling that they're not going to wear their masks. I'm sure anybody who wore a mask to that thing was probably yelled at and smacked by the people who were standing near him. Um, I can only imagine how many of those people are going to end up sick in a couple of weeks. Like, you're going to end up with sick people, and you're going to end up with some number of dead people at the end of that thing. And it's funny too, like when we're talking about this thing, like death is the only thing that matters. It's like everybody I know who has gotten COVID, and you read anybody, and lived, or you read any, anything about it, is like, it's horrendous. It's a horrendous, debilitating condition if it hits you hard, and also like ruins your lungs for the rest of your life. It's like, that's gonna be bad, man. And I can't, and also it's like, how many times do I have to read about like 25-year-old people without comorbidities who die? It's like people are just holding on to these, you know, I I don't know, these like token pieces of information that they are sure is going to help them, and I don't know that they will. It's interesting. I mean, stepping aside from the virus itself, the whole like spectacle of them choosing to do this in Tulsa in the first place, and the way that the president sort of conducted himself throughout it is really fascinating to me. It's you know the, among the things that got a lot of news attention in the aftermath of him doing this was him saying him saying I told my people to stop testing because that would mean we would have less numbers show up. And immediately,
Are you there? I think we lost. We're gonna work on it. Hello, everyone out there. A little bit of a West Coast connection issue. Hope you're okay. Happy to take questions, comments, observations in the comments below. I'll be happy to shout you out. It does say poor connection, so maybe the machine got angry at Rob's politics. I don't know. I'm gonna send him a message. Hmm. Those of you who are watching, we'll take some comments, questions. Hmm. Yeah. Yes. Bye bye. It's okay. We're just gonna sit here for a minute. How you doing? Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to grill later, in case you couldn't tell. See right there. Gonna grill. Maybe make some chicken. Hooray! I do have some. I have some things I can say. Some Sweet Tea Shakespeare stuff I can say. Um, in the what would you say? Um, Short term, I mentioned we're working on Knight's Tale, which is true. We're doing some socially distant filming of that. We're trying to figure out how streaming might work for some of our productions. We're also in the editing process for our podcast version of Midsummer Night's Dream. And we just wrapped recording for another podcast production of Dr. Faustus. So we're doing all that. We're having online auditions for our next season. It's a very exciting time. Yes, yay, Knight's Tale. Thank you for the comment. So we got lots going on. We're staying busy. We're trying to stay busy. Trying to figure out what it means to be a theater company in the COVID era until everyone gets a shot. It's tough. Um, so anyway, we're gonna see if Rob gets back in touch with us. What an exciting and wonderful time. What show am I most excited about in the upcoming season? Um, uh, the show that I'm most excited about is Much Ado About Nothing, which we are slated to do in April and May of 2021. My hope is that we will be over the COVID hurdle by then. I think it's optimistic to think we will have a vaccine, but I hope we will have ingenuity in place, if not a vaccine by then, so that we know how to do socially distant spacing and that kind of thing. So I'm hoping we're figured out by then. But Much Ado About Nothing is my is my favorite choice of our season shows for next year. We got a lot of other cool things planned too. Hooray! I should mention that this Saturday at 6:30, live from LeClaire's General Store in Fayetteville, our band will be doing a pre-show concert of our Knight's Tale music. So we were planning to do Knight's Tale in June. We couldn't do it live because COVID stuff. So we're recording it now. The performance. We started last night. We're continuing to tonight, and we're also cracking open the pre-show music and making that a concert. Tickets are pay what you will. They start at $10, but you could pay us $10,000 if you want. And details about that are sweetteashakespeare.com/tickets. Rob's still working on his thing. And we do want to talk about Hannibal. So stay tuned for that. Why Much Ado? What are you doing in that show? I don't know what I'm doing in that show yet. I just like it. It was our very first, Sweet Tea's very first production ever. Uh, ever. 2012. It was our first show. We did it in record heat with several of our male actors, in particular in leather pants. It was like 106 and 105 during the day, and we did it outside in leather pants. Rough. Anyway, I love that play. We've done it one more since then, um, and then this will be the third time doing it, and that will make it tied with our other most frequently presented play, which is Twelfth Night. We've had this strange habit of doing it every other year. We've done it 3 times, including Green Tea, and we're doing it a fourth in partnership with a local university or two. At least that's the plan this fall. So, Twelfth Night and Much Ado. I like them a lot. Huh. What other questions do we have while we're waiting for Rob and the world to solve itself? Hmm. I'm drinking some coffee. I do want to take a minute to thank the Arts Council of Fayetteville, Cumberland County, who gave us a sizable and delicious chunk of money to run podcast and streaming. So we, as soon as COVID really hit, we applied for one of their mini grants, and they were gracious enough to give it to us. And so that's what's really been funding all our efforts to this point. As I mentioned earlier, this week is a busy week. We've got a lot going on. We are doing at 1 o'clock Eastern, we're doing Enneagram 8. That's with Claire Martin, our assistant artistic director, Kelly Artis, our board member, and me. And then Claire has an interview later this afternoon on her own. I have an interview tomorrow morning with Julie Roundtree, so you can tune into that. Hello, sir.
Oh, hi.
You're back.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, it happens. I'm gonna add
Internet
you.
issues.
I've just been talking a little bit Sweet Tea stuff while you were gone.
I appreciate it.
You know,
Sorry about that.
he's
Such
back and better than ever.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. But anyway, whatever. All I was saying really, well, I don't remember what I was saying, but the other thing that was interesting to me about the president's comments during the thing is, everybody jumps on him talking about about testing, and the initial White House response to that was saying, "Oh, that was a joke." He was making a joke about them require, the more tests you have, the more positives you'll have. And then he spent the last 2 days telling everybody, no, I meant it, including this morning where he reconfirms, I wasn't kidding. I meant that. That's the thing. And it highlights an interesting thing about the president, just as a sidebar for me, which is like, everybody understands, well, some people don't, but people tend to think about him. He's dishonest or has a loose sort of relationship with the truth. But there are things where he really, if it's important to him, doesn't like to misrepresent his feelings about things. And he has this tendency to say things that are politically disadvantageous for him, or that make him look bad, because he would really like he feels like, no, this is what I mean, and I really want you all to see the logic of my position. Reminds me of that episode of The Sopranos late in the series where Tony Soprano is in a session with Dr. Malfi, and it looks normal at first, but then he starts talking about how, it's like, I've murdered lots of people in my life, and, but killing my nephew Christopher was one of the more difficult things for me. And you realize he never talks about killing people in his sessions with Dr. Malfi. he has to hide that, and you realize, oh, you're watching a dream, and what his like heart's desire is for him to say all the most horrendous things that he does without masking them and have that be okay. And that's the thing that he really wants but can't have. And I feel like there's something like that with the president as well, where he like will say these things that are, again, not in his best interest to say, and but because what he really wants is say, no, no, this is normal, everybody, this is good and normal, and my position is the right one, and by saying it I will normalize it and you'll all see that I'm right. Like, that's the world he wants to live in. I don't think he cares about the truth per se, but I think he does out being able to say whatever he thinks or whatever is on his mind without constraint.
Mhm.
And that's what this represents with the thing. Like, the true feeling in his heart is, let's not test so much, because we'll just have more positives show up. And I think the thing that he really, really wants to say, but can't, but this is like a half step away from, is, then some of you people are going to die. And that's, just something we're going to have to deal with. But it'll all be for the greater good in my election prospects. Uh, and
Yeah, and
that's,
the impression I get, eh, uh, and actually this, on some level, this makes me a little maybe gross, but sympathetic to this kind of thinking. All right,
yeah.
which is that he sees his job as managing spreadsheets, and
Mm-hmm.
he sees he it's tied to his running businesses and real estate. He has measurables in his mind. That's and so and he approaches the office not from a personal level, but like a symbolic level. And lots of presidents actually have done this.
Sure.
Where like, in order to cope themselves, they have to think of their decisions on a sort of impersonal, like, this is, yes, this may cost lives, but this is part of the larger national narrative. This is part of the national story. I have to make a what is essentially a symbolic, a poetic move to make
Mm-hmm.
that happen. And I think I don't think I understand it, but I appreciate it for sure, as a sort of way that presidents and leaders have to process things. But he sees things as a spreadsheet, and
Mm-hmm.
it's about numbers, and he is okay. Um, it moves from being human to being something else, I think, and where it becomes gross,
Yeah.
and the story that he's trying to tell is has to do with sort of the performance metrics that he decided that no one else agrees on.
I know.
You know what I mean?
Well, I know. Well, but
Or very few.
well, the things that because the things that are important to him are really important to him. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like, and not necessarily to anybody else. And I do think you're right. Like, one of the interesting things to me about the president is, as you say, uh, there is, it's about like hitting certain numbers. There is a sort of, you know, steely-eyed pragmatism at the base of it a little bit for him, about the things but it's about the things that are important to him, which again are not widely shared necessarily. Um, but he also has this funny impulse to, I think part of his persona honed over decades, like this is just part of who he is, hey, I'm the guy who tells you, what's really happening here. You know what I mean? And I think that he understands sort of intuitively that that's part of his appeal. It was part of his appeal before. It's like, all those people, they, are going to bore you with crap and niceties. I'm going to get down to brass tacks. And, the brass tacks truth of this is, um, the more tests we do, the more people are gonna show up as being sick, and that's not good for us. It's not good for me. It's not good for you. Better for us to, not have those numbers dogging us and just to move forward. And if some people die, you know, that's what happens. It's a hard world out there. But I'm the guy who's going to tell you the truth. I mean, I think that that's like the position that he's taking to some degree, and in dealing with that thing that you're talking about, Like other presidents would have the savvy to know this is something I don't need to say out loud. Like this is something that, but because it's, the being the guy who says that stuff is so sort of his self conception, I think, is so tied to that. He can't stop himself, even when it works to his detriment, as I suspect that this might, but who the hell knows? I mean, the other thing about this that I want to just like touch on with Tulsa is like the choice of Tulsa and and Juneteenth as the, or the day after as the
Well, that was the revised uh, calendar.
right. Well, I right. I mean the uh,
I mean, he ended up on the
I
20th
mean
because he
I
moved off the 19th.
yes.
Yep.
I mean, and the thing is, I actually believe he probably didn't know what Juneteenth is or that it existed. His like nobody knew this. Like every time he says nobody knew, that just means I didn't know. Uh, and um, so I don't think he's responsible for that, but somebody in his office clearly had this like gross malign intent in choosing that date and that place. Like they were clearly trying to send a message. And it's like, what was that message supposed to be? What do you think they were trying to say? I mean, I'm not like, I'm not being sarcastic. I really am curious, like, what were they trying to say? What do you think they meant by doing that?
Um, what's that? What's the phrase? Is the dog whistle? The Yeah. I mean, in my imagination, there's somebody like Stephen Miller sort of
It
writing
has
that
to, I mean,
that
it feels like it
narrative
has to
behind
be.
the scene, right? So, um, anyway, we'll have a whole episode on that someday. But yeah, I think it's to me, it goes back to some of what you were saying earlier, which is that that they're writing a story first. They write the story first, and then they map it to reality.
Yeah.
And in this case, they had to, they changed the date because
Well, it just
the
became too,
calculate, right?
it can't be a dog whistle anymore if everybody's talking about it explicitly. If
Yep,
it's supposed to be a dog whistle, it doesn't
yep,
serve your
yep, yep,
purposes.
yep.
But the whole thing about it, it's like, who is that a dog whistle for? It's like anybody who's gonna, find particular, if the belief is we're doing this in Tulsa, the place where there was a famously terrible massacre of, you know, many black people because they were too rich, uh, by a group of, you know, KKK members and racists who didn't like seeing successful black people, so they did that and killed hundreds and hundreds of them and destroyed, their livelihoods. So we're doing it in that place on, a holiday commemorating emancipation. Uh, and it's like, who knows those two data points and is going to really be excited by them? Like really hardcore racists, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they're the only people who are gonna know about those two things, also find some pleasure in it. I mean, you're talking about like Stormfront weirdos or Aryan Nation weirdos, like, or just people who are like, or Stephen Miller, like somebody who's like, white nationalists. It's like that's Richard Spencer stuff. It's like that's the kind of level of conversancy that you have to have with those. I mean, because to know about the Tulsa massacre and to know about Juneteenth and to be really excited that you're optically using those as, to push back against the events of the last few weeks, you have to be super like, not just casually racist. You have to be like professionally racist.
Well, and this goes back to, so here's what I think is happening now to some degree. I think, and I think this is the strategy. Um, I and I don't think it's entirely in control. I do think it's the strategy, but I think the strategy is, um, it's just energizing the base. That's the bet. Is that there are more
Yes.
people like that who are going to get excited and show up, risking their health and lives and that of their loved ones to a rally and rallies because there are more planned,
Right.
and that is both a reward for those people, an acknowledgement of those people who feel uh, maybe fairly so invisible, and it's a bet that those people are going to be so excited and have ginned themselves up that they will show up for Donald Trump in ways that the left will not get excited about with regard to Joe
About
Biden. And I think
yeah.
that's the fundamental calculation. It's almost a giveaway of the middle. Um, eh,
It's not just almost nothing. It is.
well, yeah, but I still think I still think he's playing the middle to some degree, or will by the time we get to the general. On
Maybe. I mean,
strangely
they'd like to bring
economic
the
terms, he's going to try. I don't
yeah,
know that he will
no, they'd like
succeed,
to
but
bring him along.
yeah.
Well, and it's probably why you have to move off of they had to move off of Juneteenth because again, it's a shocking admission on the part of people in the Trump campaign. And again, I don't think President Trump specifically, because I don't think that he's a guy who the Tulsa massacre is on his radar, or the fact of Juneteenth being a thing. I don't think he knows either of those things. But people like Brad Parscale, people like Stephen Miller, those guys are clearly keyed into this, and their calculation, their clear belief here is that our base, who we need to signal to, are like, committed ideological racists. Like that, I mean, because otherwise it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
It's entirely incoherent to have chosen that place and that day. I mean, if it wasn't to send a message out to the people who know about those things and will, take pleasure in the message and the optics. And those are like, again, and so that's the Trump administration's like self-conception. Those are the people who they feel are the most important to them.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling on themselves in this amazing way. I don't feel like people have like given that enough attention. I mean, there's been it was a horrendous bad thing for them to choose this date and this place. What a slap in the face. Yes, fair enough, but dig into what the meaning is, and it's even weirder. It's like it really places it's in a context of the whole, like, there are very nice people, very good people on both sides thing. It's like there's been an attempt on the right to talk about that as it being sort of less meaningful when Trump said it than was ascribed to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he wasn't saying that the racists were, bad people. He was trying unsuccessfully and unconvincingly to thread the needle that, there are people who might be sympathetic to, broader issues outside of the directly sort of intensely racial ones that were there. And those people are good. That's sort of the middle position that you'll find a lot of people try to justify what he said there with. But what this like choice of Tulsa and the date of the rally really indicates is no, that's not what he meant. He really was talking to the Confederate flag waving, tiki torch lighting, little Brooks Brothers Nazis that were walking down the street that day, and that he includes those people. Any other politician, you can. I mean, a guy like John McCain, Joe Biden's done the same thing. They'll be like, if you are this kind of a racist, if you're voting for me because you don't want to vote for a woman, if you're voting for me because you don't want to vote for a black person, I don't want your vote. Like that's, mainstream politician 101 when it comes to, disavowing those people. The president will not do that under any circumstances. He will never say it's like, if you're voting for me because you're a racist, don't vote for me. That And I feel like this is, really staggering evidence of it. So it's hard not to feel bad that the whole
Yeah,
thing
while
comes
we're
up.
on, I would just say while we're wrapping up the subject of Tulsa and trying to connect this to the work of entertainment and popular culture,
Sure.
I would commend unto our listeners that the Watchmen,
Yeah.
which we can dedicate some time to in a future episode,
Yeah. We got to talk
is
about
really
that for.
worthy watching, and I think, um, um, and it's free this weekend actually. You can watch The Watchmen on an HBO service without
Yeah,
having to pay for HBO, and it's worth your time doing.
it is.
And
And honestly, it's the only reason, if the Watchmen TV show had not happened, I guarantee you that Tulsa would not have been chosen as the place for this rally. It, it's not like it was this entirely unknown historical event, but it brought it into the public conversation in a way that it hasn't been. And somebody at the White House either watched that show or read about it and was like, aha, there's great symbolic import to us choosing to put this thing here now. And yeah, we should talk about the Watchmen at a later date. Um, my last favorite thing, though, on this Tulsa topic, my favorite little thing that has come out as a I don't know if I'd call it artistic, but like media sort of result of it is the video clip of the president walking dejectedly from his helicopter after the event with his like tie loosened and he's sort of shuffling with this, Charlie Brown grimace and sort of. Have you seen this? Do you know what
mm-hmm,
I'm talking
mm-hmm.
about? Yeah, and the and people putting different pieces of music behind it. Um, Everybody Hurts or the sad Charlie Brown music or all those things. I would recommend people to go out and find those. They're pretty funny. So anyway,
Have fun
we
on
can,
Reddit, folks.
yeah, we can move on. The other thing that we had wanted to talk about today was
Speaking of people being eaten alive, wait,
yes,
um, that's my pivot. Sorry.
that's yeah, no, it's a good segue. Was the show Hannibal, which has been off the air for a couple of years now. It was an NBC TV series, but is receiving it's having a funny little media boomlet right now. There's a New York Magazine blog post written about it, and people are paying a little more attention to it suddenly because it became available on Netflix, and everybody seems to be looking for stuff to stream as original content begins to dry up more and more. And there's been a sort of fresh appreciation of this show, which both Jeremy and I were big fans of when it was actually being broadcast. So we'll take this opportunity to talk about it a little bit.
Okay. First of all, the thing you need to understand about Hannibal, in my view, is that it's appalling to me that it made network television. It is. It is. That is the number one overriding thing. That
Yeah,
was my comment at the time. Was how did it make it onto television? Period. Let alone
I know.
network television.
Let
It was
alone network
freaking.
TV.
It's unbelievable what they're allowed to get away with in that show.
Yeah, for people who don't know what it is, it's an adaptation of Thomas Harrison's novels uh, featuring Hannibal Lecter, the character who was famously brought to life by Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, and then the sequel Hannibal and Red Dragon. Hannibal Lecter, who'd also been in the movie Manhunter, as in the novels Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising as a younger man. Hannibal, the TV show, was an adaptation most specifically of Red Dragon, but also the book Hannibal, and pulls in elements of Hannibal Rising, but they did not have the rights to Silence of the Lambs. So they take those three books and then just sort of mash them together and mix them around so things happen out of sequence from when they were originally written. But it's all centered around Hannibal Lecter, the psychiatrist who is also a genius and a cannibal, as well as being an aesthete and gourmet cook. And Will Graham, who's the FBI profiler who in Red Dragon uh, captured Hannibal Lecter and sort of sparred with him, but in the TV show is friends with him for a number of years before the events of Red Dragon actually happened in the show. And so on the show Hannibal, you see Hannibal Lecter while he's a practicing psychiatrist, a respected person in the Baltimore area. And he is an advisor, a consultant to the FBI in their search for serial killers. And that's how he and Will Graham get hooked up. And it is grotesquely violent. Not just violent, but like disturbing. And the most like explicit gore imagery I have ever seen on a television show was on this show that was broadcast on NBC, as Jeremy notes here. Not HBO, not Showtime, not any pay cable channel. It is astounding the level of violence of this show, but it's also, it's great.
And that's where so it is so good that it does not it's so fantastic. The cast is fantastic, the storytelling is fantastic, the visual imagery is fantastic, everything about it is prime quality. And I'm sure that buys them some license to get away with some of the other things, and in terms of the gore and the violence. NBC was also in a downturn at the time, and so I think there was more space at that time to do strange work like that.
Yeah. So well, and there was an interesting to get into the business side of things. Like there was an interesting setup that brought that about. NBC did not produce the show, and they didn't pay for it at all. It's a European produced TV show. Galmont, which is a French production company, was the money behind it. And NBC only paid a licensing fee to air the show, which is nominal and gets made up in the first commercial break. So it was a show that was entirely free for them. It was just free money. It was like throw something on the air and you'll make money with it. And it got such great critical acclaim that it was kind of a feather in their cap that they were airing it, in spite of the fact that it was clearly not a network TV show in its spirit, and had far more disturbing imagery than is normal. Shows like CSI, I think, had opened the door for some really pretty graphic violence to be shown on television. And so I think that there were precedents that they could point to and say, well, we've seen skinned bodies on CSI. We've seen this on CSI. The thing that really set it apart on Hannibal is, yes, there is that sort of procedural cop show gore, but it's presented in such wildly surrealistic at times or disturbingly artistic or just unsettling ways, that really tap into horror movie sort of aesthetics, but also with a very elevated, thing that it just stood out as like nothing on network television has ever been like it before. But yeah, so it occupied this funny little place, which is, in why it was allowed to exist at all. And it went 3 seasons, which is also kind of amazing, but it is an incredible show. And the biggest, there are a lot of things to like about it. Like it's shot impeccably. It's a beautiful looking show. And one of the funny things about it, like Hannibal Lecter's gourmet sort of sensibilities are portrayed, through this like lavish, amazing photography that, makes everything look great, and the style, it's impeccable. And you know, uh, and also like the references that they're making, it's clearly a show made by people with a deep sort of understanding of sort of sophisticated uh, culture and references, which is fun. But then the performance by Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal Lecter did something I thought was impossible, which is like replaced Anthony Hopkins in my mind as the quintessential version of that. I mean, that part's been played by Anthony Hopkins. Um, what's his name
Brian Cox.
from Brian Cox, and who are both, two of the greatest actors who've ever, been on film, certainly. But Mads Mikkelsen, I feel like, is the definitive Hannibal Lecter in my mind, which I was not expecting when that show happened. I mean, it's an incredible performance that's funny and also menacing, and I think it's interesting because both Hopkins and Cox in their portrayals of Lecter, they're older men. They're not. There's an elegance to Hopkins Lecter, but he isn't. You wouldn't say attractive per se, but Mickelson is a really good-looking guy and brings sort of an overtly sexual element to this, like a sexiness to the part that makes him much more upsetting. I don't know. I think it's a great show. I love it so much. And
I have advice for people who want to check it out, which is don't watch it after 8 o'clock at night. Your life will change. Your sleeping life will change. Your dreaming life will change. It is that invasive. Really, it's an invasive show that dialogue, character. I think even actually without the visuals would do some sort of unpacking and uncracking of one's own psychology to a certain degree. It's destabilizing in that way. But when you add the visuals, it actually, the visuals, aside from the gore, it deals with nightmare imagery, and there's a recurring
yeah,
stag and some other things that are really Jungian, archetypal,
and
uh,
unsettling, like
unsettling,
fundamentally.
destabilizing, and then when you add the worst gore you will have seen outside of a horror genre, I think you
Yeah,
go into sort of prepared for that. It's like you will just change. It just changes you, I think.
yeah, that is all true. But for all of that, it's also worth noting that it's a very funny show.
Mm.
Like, uh, which may be hard to believe on the basis of what we've been saying here, but the person who created the series and was the showrunner is Brian Fuller, who had a background in a number of things, but he started out on Star Trek and then did the show Dead to Me, which was a funny, not Dead to Me, Dead Like Me, which was a sort of supernatural show about sort of grim reapers that had a comedic bent to it. Starred Mandy Patinkin. And then did the show Pushing Daisies, which was this very funny, sort of whimsical show. But all of them had strong visual elements to them. And he brings this very playful sense of humor to the character, to the show and to the character of Hannibal Lecter, who's played with a very sort of dry, wry humor by by Mads Mikkelsen, who can really switch between being very funny to being really menacing very quickly. It's an impressive performance. And then Hugh Dancy plays Graham, who's not a funny character. He sort of really does the more dramatic heavy lifting on that show, but he's also an effective person in there. But there is just like this, there is this sort of dark sense of humor at play at all times. on that show, which is a lot of fun too. And the cast is great. In addition to the people we talked about, like Lawrence Fishburne is the other, big above the line star of the show, and has great performances from people like Gillian Anderson and uh,
Eddie Izzard,
Eddie Izzard. Yeah,
Raul Esparza.
yeah, Raul Esparza, who is perhaps it's an impressive performance because his character is like intensely unlikable, and yet you end up feeling very, very bad for him over the course of that series. um, it's great, and another interesting thing about it is like at the core of the show is this sort of at first sort of under the surface homoerotic relationship between Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter that becomes increasingly sort of um, textual as opposed to subtextual as the show moves along, uh, which was again a fascinating thing to see portrayed on network television. And I know that they had hoped to have a fourth season, but it ended at the third season. And I have to say, like, the way that it ends is one of the most sort of impressive and effective, like, conclusions I have ever seen to a TV show, even if they hadn't necessarily intended it to be the end. They clearly were thinking this could be the end, and it's a real jaw dropper what they're willing to do at the end of that show. And it's great. People should see it if you have the stomach for it. That's for sure. I don't know. Any other thoughts about that?
I loved it. I mean, I think you introduced me to it actually, and it quickly rose to the very very top of my list of things in the last whatever period of time in terms of TV, and it's
Yeah,
stayed there. It's just fantastic.
yeah. It's one of my all time favorite shows. I will say, um, my sometimes writing partner, Dave Parkin, who I work with, has very little sort of patience for it because it is pretty pretentious. I have a pretty high tolerance for pretension. So if that's something that you think is going to bother you, just know going in that it'll definitely push those buttons. But if that's okay by you, thumbs up, go get it.
Well, let us know what you think. We're always happy to hear from you. Hours at sweetteashakespeare.com, or buzz us whatever way you can get us if you know us personally. We're not above putting our wives and siblings on the air. All right.
All
Until next
right.
time, sir.
Yep. Talk to you later.
Ta ta.